It's the AM show with Benjamin Akakpo and Bernice Abubeidulanta. Welcome back. Now, we're going to be telling you about, well, the latest when it comes to the Public Utilities and Regulatory Commission, which has increased electricity and water tariffs by 29.96% and 8.3% respectively. Now, the new rates take effect from the 1st of February 2023, and it follows the conclusion of its regulatory process for the quarterly adjustment of utility tariffs covering the first quarter of 2023. But we ask, how is this going to affect you, the consumer? How are businesses going to take this? We know that they're not going to be on so much of the losing end commercially. Bernice Abubeidulanta will join us with Citizens Microphone to get your views on this. But joining us in the studio for a discussion, well, virtually, I should say, our guest, Alhaj Jabaru Abukari, is Director, Regional Operations with the PURC. There's also Alexis Derry, Executive Member, Center for Development Initiatives. Both of them join us for this conversation. Gentlemen, a very good morning to you.
Thank you very much.
And I think I'm hearing a response, but it's very low. Hello? I'm hearing a response, but it's very low.
Good morning.
Okay, so I hear one of you listening to me or watching me on a television set. Please move away or lower the volume on the set because we're getting feedback from what you're watching me on. I don't know which one of you yet. So let's just do this. Alexis Derry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, my brother.
Great, loud and clear. Alhaj, can you hear me? All right, so we'll try to work it out and get Alhaj back on the line. But Mr. Derry, in terms of what we have to face now, people have spoken about what this would mean, this latest increment. But let's start from the processes involved. I would have wanted to start the conversation from there with Alhaj in terms of what processes come to bear when the PURC increases these utility tariffs. This would be the second time in about 6 months that we're seeing an increment. For you, what does this mean in very basic terms, Mr. Derry?
I mean, it means, particularly talking about the vulnerable in particular, it certainly will have an impact on smoothing their household consumption in terms of disposable income. And more importantly, when we are talking about the vulnerable, I will always want to look at what we as a society have set aside to cushion those who actually don't have in terms of government planned social interventions like the LEAP. So I will be more interested in hearing what went into the processes as well. But yesterday, I did some check and I saw that on the PURC board, they have such a very fantastic representative of CSO's representation. And he has also done a lot of work on tariff increases and its implications on the vulnerable. So for me, I would be more interested in finding out to what extent have they factored in the voice of the voiceless, who in many instances, when we are talking about consultation, the consultation sometimes does not even involve them because there's a vast difference between consultation and effective participation. So for instance, you do the consultation, and if the people don't have what it takes to make input into the discussions, what is it? They will only be counted as part of the statistics, as part of the numbers who have been part of it. So I will be more interested in finding out, number one, to what extent has the vulnerable been included? Then number two, I will equally be very interested in finding out, that has been something I've been thinking of, to what extent has the PURC or does the PURC make use of the Ghana National Household Registry, which is a fantastic database under the Ministry of Gender and Social Protection, funded by the World Bank with DFID, which means that if we want the households that are poor, we can equally get them. So it means that it makes it possible for effective targeting. And once we are talking about tariff increases, it means then that if we want to deliberately see how we can cushion the impact on poor households, we have the data. But you know, as a country, many instances, we have these fantastic institutional arrangement in place, but lack of collaboration, lack of consultation. They don't talk to each other. So when we get the PURC person, let's ask him a direct question. Whether they are aware of the existence of this Ghana National Household Registry, which is a very unique initiative to make sure that when you want to do social intervention, proper, effective, targeted, you get the data. So it is not about we don't have the data, it will be difficult because they are missed out and all that. I will be more interested in that. Then once as the discussion progresses, I will filter down more directly to the impact on the household, particularly the social protection, LIP, and then the challenges they also have. Because that's the only source of livelihood that some of these vulnerable people can access.
Right. Thank you for those initial comments, Mr. Derry. And yes, we'll be going to Alhaj as well to find out what his take is when we have him. But I am joined by Kofi Ejay, my colleague here at the Multimedia Group, who will walk us through some dynamics when it comes to the latest utility tariff increments. Kofi, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure having you. I guess this morning we had to wake you up pretty early. Our apologies for that. But what is the latest that you can share with us in terms of the dynamics of utility tariff increments over time, over the last few periods of increments? We know that in the last 6 months there has been a 2-window increment. What can you tell us in respect of that?
All right, so very well. There's what the PURC called the major tariff adjustment, and then there's also what we call the quarterly, review. So what they did was to review for the first quarter of 2023. But before this year, there was a major tariff review in 2022. Remember that in 2022, both ECG and then Ghana Water Company, they all submitted their proposals to the PURC requesting for an increment in electricity tariffs. They cited a lot of reasons based on which they felt that they needed some upward adjustment. And so if you look at the data that they submitted to the PURC in 2022, which is last year, Ghana Water Company wanted somewhere around 334% increments in electricity tariff, maybe across board. We saw ECG also requesting for 148%. But when, the PURC finally agreed upon consultations, they came to conclusion that they could not, grant these two utility companies their earlier, requests. So we saw Ghana Water Company getting just 21.55% of what they requested for. And then also ECG getting somewhere around 27% of what they requested for. There was a huge variance between what they requested for and what they actually got. But PURC, based their decision on what the economic indicators, the prevailing economic indicators then, around the time that they actually approved the new tariff, we saw the city was a bit stable. And then inflation, although was still in the double-digit zone, it was not around the kind of level we see currently. So they had to, agree on these two adjustments. But if you look at what we saw at the dying numbers of the year, the city was doing well, but somewhere around, August to October, the city really lost, a significant amount of its value. It lost close to 54% of its value to the dollar. We saw inflation rising from the 13% that we began the year with. And we know that the year ended with an inflation rate more than 54%. So if you look at the first graphic that you just showed, PURC said that when they were doing this first adjustment, they have assumptions that they used. And the first assumption was that in August, when they actually approved the utility tariff, they use an exchange rate of $1 is to 7 cedi 50 pesos and inflation of 10.06%. but they are forecasting that in the first quarter of 2022, they see $1 to the cedi around 10 cedi 54 pesos, and then inflation maybe coming down to 42.63% if you hold other things constant. And so we've been tracking the various adjustment that PURC have had over time, but these are the main reasons, plus other reasons, the cost of gas and other things that they cited in the press statement, that based on these 4 reasons, there were actually 4, they cannot decide to hold the current tariffs the way they are. So we have to get an upward adjustment. So we've seen that if you are a lifeline user of electricity, if you consume between 0 to 30 kilowatts hour, your tariff has actually gone up by more than 21%. You now be paying, instead of the 42 pesos, you'll be paying 54 pesos. And those consuming between other residential users consuming between 0 to 30 kilowatts hour, instead of paying 89 pesos, you'll be paying 1 cedi 15 pesos. And those who are non-residential, users, instead of paying, some 33 pesos, you'll be paying 1 cedi 8 pesos. But then I've also been looking at the current inflation figures, and we've been tracking inflation for both utilities, water and electricity. For the 54.1% inflation rate that we currently see, the top, drivers, electricity and then also water, all have inflation rates above, 82%. So if you look at all these, and then plus other factors, then the PURC think that you cannot leave the utility company still in this this condition, because they fear that there's a probability if they do not do this, we probably will return to the doomsday area zone where we had we had to share power. But they feel that if we are able to do this, it will help us to cut anything like under recovery or over recovery, probably in the first quarter of the year. But over the years from 2010 to 2022, we've seen a lot of tariff adjustments. We can count about 30 of them, of which 12 of them have been upward adjustments, 2 have been reductions, and 16 have been no change. They've been held constant. We are looking at the main adjustments. Within these main adjustments, you can still have a subset of other adjustments, which, just like we saw for 2022, the upward adjustment we saw was supposed to cover 2022 to 2025. It means that PURC, they still have the right to either adjust upward, downward, or still maintain the rate within a certain, a certain quarter based on the prevailing market indicators. And so, if you look at 2010, for instance, when the main adjustment was done, it was an increase where we saw in June that PURC came in to increase the tariff. So if you can show the color chart that we have for our audience to look at, if you look at it, our viewers can see that if you see a color in red, it simply means that PURC had to upwardly adjust the electricity tariff. If you see it in yellow, it was maintained, and if you see that there's blue, it means that PURC did not do any major electricity or water tariff, upward or downward adjustments. And you can see the color charts for yourself. A lot of reds we see in there. We also have some blue in there, but it's rare to have tariffs being held constant because of the precarious nature of some of our economic indicators. This morning I was checking the dollar to the cedi, and it's currently above $1 to 12 cedis. It's above 12 cedis now. And inflation, for instance, although the rate is 54.1%, we've been checking the rate of increase, and we've seen that the rate of increase has actually slowed down. We are hoping that
which is what I mean, we've heard the central bank's governor hint at as well that it will still keep increasing. We've heard from business people say it will still keep increasing, but at a lower rate, because the last time, I mean, before December, I think November's was about a 10-point gap, if I recall. Then December, we saw, just about a 3-4% gap. So it means it is slowing down. When it will actually plateau, that we do not know yet.
Yeah. So basically, that is it. We are just hoping that inflation will plateau in the first quarter of 2020, as we are all projecting. And this will really help us, because you can't have these two utilities, both water and electricity, all recording very high inflation. We've been looking at the data, and you realize that anytime we release the headline figures, both water and electricity, they all record inflation rates above the headline figure. And to have a headline figure of 54.1%, it will indirectly, translate into some of these utility items having more inflation rate. So above 82% is not acceptable, because it's supposed to remain affordable, especially for those who are lifeline consumers. Remember that the lifeline consumer, brackets, I remember when PURC issued their statement when they did the first major adjustments in 2022 last year, was actually broadened from 0 to, I think, 50 kilowatts hour. They are still maintaining the 0 to 30. I don't know when they'll implement the 0 to 50, but it's important for lifeline consumers to also be cushioned, because if you keep increasing the price, then it means accessibility is going to be an issue. Remember that these lifeline consumers also have, kids going to school. They will need light to study. They also need light to perform their basic activities, and then they will need the light to also be maintained or be somewhat, affordable. So for lifeline consumers to also have such a hit is a major challenge. For industries as well, it's a major challenge, because if you look at water, for instance, the upward adjustment that the PURC did for public, stand pipes, you see that they are increasing it from some 4 cedis, 49 pesos, to now 4 cedis, 80 pesos. And those who are non-residential users, from 1 cedi, 12 pesos, to 1 cedi, I think 21 pesos. And so if you look at this data, you realize that it's business-wise, those who are producing sachet water isn't really good for them. Because if you look at the Ghana Fiscal Service data, we rely, our population rely a lot on sachet water as the major source of drinking water. And so we must find ways and means to make sure that the price, stays the same, or maybe even if there's going to be an increase, the inflation rate shouldn't be as we saw in 2022 last year. And then it should be affordable, because 2 years or a year ago, you could afford a sachet water for 20 pesos. But now, if you do not have 50 pesos, it will be hard for you to even get sachet water. And we've seen bottled water prices also going up. A year ago, you could get bottled water for 1 cedi 50 pesos and 1 cedi 20 pesos. It's now 2 cedi 50 pesos, and some even around 5 cedis, or even 3 cedi 50 pesos. So if you look at all these, this data that we've shown you, if PURC has decided to increase the tariff, then we probably will have translating into some increments in water and then electricity in the days to come.
Kofi, thank you so much for walking us through all of this. But I have an interesting bit right before you go. We're told at a point in time that commercial users would be the least affected when these tariff increments come up. Is that reflective in what we're seeing? That, usually it is the commercial users, because they are using it commercially, they should be getting some rebates because they are using it for industry and all of that. And residential users have, over the years, rather benefited more, seemingly. What can you say about that right before you take leave of us?
Well, I think the PURC did well. To me, I feel that it was 8% across board. Now, if you look at this 8% across board, I do not have access to detailed data on each of the categories. But I feel if it is 8% across board, that is the average. But if you look at what I'm looking at here, the non-residential category from 1 cedi 12 pesos to 1 cedi 21 pesos, it's an upward adjustment, all right, but it's not as huge if you really compare it to what we've seen in electricity. So for water, the increment is less than what we saw in electricity. Is around 21%. Water is 8% across board. But I'm sure that, if we have the breakdown of the data, we'll see, and then probably calculate, we'll be able to check the trend and see if this particular adjustment is smaller if you compare it to relatively to other, upward adjustment. But it's 8% across board, and 8% across board is relatively less than what we saw for electricity.
Thank you so much, Kofi Ajay, for giving us that insight into these matters. He is on our research desk. Let's get back to the conversation with our guests joining us via Zoom. We have Alexis Derry, Executive Member, Center for Development Initiatives. I'm sure that has given you even more scope into the dynamics of what these latest increments mean. But we also have Alhaj Jabaru Abukari. Alhaj, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much.
Great. So we've had a lot of talk about the latest tariff increments in 2023. The request by the Ghana Water Company Limited was for 334%. You gave them 15.5 times less of that, which is 21.55%. And then when we look at electricity, they were looking at some 148%, which is some 6.68 times less in terms of what they have got. So in effect, we're looking at some 29 point something percent for electricity, 8 point something percent for water. But what went into these permutations, these dynamics? People are talking about inflationary rate and everything. Walk us through what went into pegging these utility tariff increments at what we see.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you and your viewers. I will first of all want to thank the colleagues who have already spoken, specifically to your data analyst, Kojo, who has done my work for me.
Kofi Ajay.
Kofi Ajay, who has done the work of the PURC, because we have data available. I think the analysis he has done is very, very comprehensive, looking at what has historically been decisions taken by the Commission and the data available. I think the only thing I would like to add to what analysis that he did was the hydro mix, which has an implication on the cost. You see, the hydro mix in the last decision that was taken by the commissioners was around 20, and currently is 26. And the implication is that hydro is cheap. That means that it brought down the cost of doing the supplying the power to consumers. So invariably, the percentage of increase would have been more if we had the same hydro allocation. So that is just one that I would like to add. To come specifically to your question, I have seen that most of the utilities just are business people like any other person who is running any sort of commercial business. What normally will happen is that they use market rates. If they are doing their projections, they do their projections based on the rate at which they get their goods and commodities. And when they submit these proposals to the Commission will now, through its own various checks, do independent verifications and data using state agencies. So we cannot go and use the exchange rate that is quoted by the forest bureaus. We will have to use the reliable forest bureau, the reliable rates, that is the BOG one, the interbank ones. And we normally will use historic data and projections, and that is how you will see that we'll have less ones. Then also, there were some projections that were made by the utilities, online loans, and this government had to take a decision to take the online loans. Government had taken the loans and asked them to pay. So as part of the consultations, the commission will always consult the various stakeholders. So if you want it to be passed on to consumers, looking at the economic situation, will you want Ghanaians to pay? And I think the government held on to the online loans, so it was one of the issues. Then also, they will also have some returns. So if there are online loans and you put in your investment, you need some returns. So some of these returns they had to defer some the returns, and that was the reason why you will see great some sort of gap between what they requested and what was granted them. I think there was some issue that was raised by Kofi with regards to the lifeline reduction. Historically, the 50 kilowatt per hour was done looking at some studies. And at that time, we had the incandescent bulbs, which were not energy saving. So most of the gadgets we had then were not energy saving. So now that we have energy saving, they've done analysis of that, and that was the reason why it was reduced to 30. So all these issues, the commissions will not just come up and take a decision. It always will have to take its time. Sometimes you will expect that maybe we'll come up with a tariff around some specific period. And the commissioners, mostly I will say that they are very independent when it comes to their decisions. So even the secretariat cannot influence when they come up with their decisions. So they look at, if they are not clear in their minds, the numbers they are seeing, and they need to do double check, they will not be hastening by the fact that we say we will do it around this time, so we have to do it. Mind you, various stakeholders were accusing the commission for not always passing the quarterly adjustments, and that was the reason why the utilities were bringing some higher percentages. And we promised, as part of the publication in the last tariff, that the quarterly adjustment was going to be implemented, and that is what the commission is just trying to do. He indicated there are 3 scenarios: no change, increase, or decrease. So depending on where the economic indicators are going, there is a possibility that we could have a reduction in tariff. So what we have to do is just to pray that at least
just to recap that, Alhaj, are you saying there is the possibility that there could be a decrement in tariffs?
Yes. Yes, it's their indicators and parameters that we are using. We don't work in isolation. Inflation, exchange rate, and hydro. And like I've said, if maybe looking at if everything had remained constant, maybe the inflation, the exchange rate, and hydro had increased, we would have seen some decrease in terms of rates, because hydro allocation has gone up. So there's a possibility that if exchange rate, the CD appreciates or the inflation comes down, there is a possibility that we might have a reduction. And it has happened. So let's not always look at tariff adjustments as just increase. So, and the commission has its own guidelines and its SOPs and operational manuals that guides their decision taking. So as commissioners, they just don't also get up and increase or decrease or whatever. There are some situations where there might be a changes even in the rate, but consumers might not know. They will just see a no change, but in between the value chain, maybe BGT, that is the bulk generation tariff, would have reduced or increased. But invariably, there is an over recovery somewhere. So if somebody has made more than what he was supposed to make, it will be given back to the system, to the where there is a shortage. So there are a lot of things that happen within the value chain that mostly the end user might not notice. So the end user always will try to feel it when there is a change at the end user rate, and that is where we normally have individuals talking. The first speaker indicated the civil society, and I think he had gone to our website and he has checked, and he realized that the PURC commissioners are a composition of various stakeholders. We have the TUC being represented, we have consumers being represented, we have the AGI being represented. So their membership, they are the decision makers. So they always look at the interests of their various constituents when it comes to decision makers. But if the numbers are very clear to choose, do we need to have electricity to use it to at least grow our economy, to use it to our benefit, or we don't want it? If you look at the sub-region, Ghana is, I can say, is one of the best in terms when it comes to electricity supply in the sub-region. We have stable supply, and it is because of the dynamics of the balancing act that we are putting in place. We know where we are coming from. We all know what Dumso did to our industries, what Dumso did to people's gadgets, what Dumso did to the livelihood of individuals and all these things. So we don't want to go back there. So as a regulator, what I would want to let people know is that even the decision takers, the commissioners, they also pay bills. They pay water bills. The secretariat staff pay bills. They pay water bills. The utility staff pay bills. They pay water. Nobody will want to pay. But it is so imperative that if we don't take such decisions, there is a possibility that we might not have the commodity. So we have to choose having it or not having it. And if we are having it at a minimal cost per the analysis the commission has put in place, then it is better we go in for having it and pay a little bit much. Looking at the economic.
I want to pose one question to you right before I go to Alexis Derry. But something interesting came to mind. You know, usually people would say, oh, parliamentarians get all of these perks, ministers get these perks. Let me find out from you. As staff, crucial staff of the PURC, do you get any perks, any discounts when it comes to electricity or water tariffs in any shape or form? Do you get anything in there so that you are not paying the rates that ordinary people would pay? I see I've got you laughing.
Brother, thank you very much. You see, that is why I always will make people to know that some of us even live in rented places where we share meters with other people. So how can we get a place? So we live in communities. We don't have an enclave or a cluster of place that we live that is separated. No, we just live as ordinary people with other people, and in some situations we share the same. We share meters with other people, and we also pay the same. So it is a painful thing. But as Kofi did, I think he did a very, very comprehensive analysis looking at the data that we have on our website. And I don't have much to say when it comes to the economic indicators and decisions that have been taken. So I just rely on, I think, the analysis that he did. So kudos to Joy team for that comprehensive. And we entreat other stakeholders to visit our website. The data is there. And once we look at it, we'll have informed the communications mostly.
Let me come to you, Alexis Derry. I'll come back to you on something tied to that, Alhaj. Just stay with us. But Mr. Derry, if you look at the exchange rate, some assumptions that were made, the last time we had an increment in September, not the latest one, September, you would notice that we're looking at a dollar rate of 7.51 to the Ghana cedi. That is $1 equaling about 7.51. That's the effective rate, looking at the assumption, and the inflation at 10. Then you look at the approved rates, effective the 1st of February 2023, and you look at the exchange rate pegged around 10.5, and with inflation hovering around 42.63%. You can make the permutations. Obviously, things have changed. If you look at September last year and the increment, putting that side by side with inflation then, which was also very high, inflation has gone even higher. So don't you think that if something were not brought to bear as far as the utility tariffs are concerned, this could have been very negative for the providers? What is your take? You may have to unmute, Mr. Derry.
Yes, there's no doubt that if something was not done. Okay, I'm just saying that, yes, it is true that if something is not done or was not done, the system will crash. There's no doubt about that. But for me, where I sit and the people doesn't change the equation for them, because if inflation dynamic changes and then they are only more most reliable source of livelihood, then to them it doesn't make any sense. And that is where I still have a challenge. I mean, as like a consumer, like Alaji rightly also said, I also pay, do all those things that ordinary Ghanaians equally go to. But I mean, the excluded, the most vulnerable, that is where my emphasis is on. And like the first question I asked, which went before Alaji came, I will be interested in getting education on to what extent do they make provision for these kind of category of people, more especially when there is a database that has now been made possible through the Ghana National Household Registry. So it is not like we don't know where these are. There are households, they have been classified. To what extent do we also take them into consideration? For example, I'm making this because if you look at the one of the objectives of the Ghana households is to make sure that they support institutional coordination to improve impact of spending on social areas.
Hello, Mr. Derry.
More importantly, we are talking about. Yes, can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead.
Okay. So I am more interested in their situation because most.
Well, we have poor connectivity to Alexis Derry, Executive Member, Center for Development Initiatives. We'll try to reach him on the phone lines instead, so we can have a fluid conversation without all the interruptions, technological interruptions. But while we try to do that, let me get back to Alhaj Bukari. What would have been the consequences if these tariff adjustments had not been brought to bear? We saw the requests that had been put forward by the ECG, by the Ghana Water Company Limited. 334% is what the Ghana Water Company wanted. 148% ECG wanted. But if you look at the variance in terms of what we've given them, very wide variations. 15.5 times less what we gave to the Ghana Water Company Limited, 6.68 times, practically some 7 times less what the ECG wanted. So what would have been the consequences if there had been no tariff adjustment?
Yes, that would mean that clearly we would have been building up our debt because somebody has to pay for it. And that is, I always will tell people that it's two ways. Either we socialize the cost for every Ghanaian who even that do not use light or water to pay, or to spread it across people who specifically use light and water to pay. Imagine a factory using electricity to manufacture something and sell. Then you now socialize the cost and say somebody who is living in a village where there is no even light to pay through taxation. We have to know that ECG and Ghana Water, NETCO, and GRICO, most of the VRA, which is also government-owned, are government of Ghana property, Ghanaians' property. So if we don't treat them effectively, at least give them the minimal. The reason why sometimes PURC is able to even have a bit less in terms of the impact, in terms of cost shifting, is because of their government of Ghana share, 100% share owned by government. Sometimes the government, looking at the economic indicators, can say, let me give away maybe my returns. A private man will not say, I'll give out my returns. Let's take the IPPs. Most of the cost buildup comes from the independent power producers, because for them, they have invested and they need to take their returns. So irrespective of the economic indicators, they will invoice you at the price that they are expected to invoice you. But with ECG, Ghana Water, NETCO, GRICO, sometimes the regulator has to look at, and sometimes we go beyond their management and their board to talk to even the shareholder through a position paper to let them know the implications if we are going to shift all the costs to the Ghanaian to pay. And these are some of the things. So if we don't pay, first of all, we might not even have the power available. And we know the consequences falling onto the alternative. That is, individuals have to get their own generator and get their own fuel to run for electricity. And That is those who can't. There are a lot of industries that cannot even have an alternative, because looking at the volumes of consumption, that means that they have to build their own independent power plant, because the energy need, it will be very difficult for you to get a generator, a small plant to be able to do that. So that would mean that they have to do a lot of capital intensive investment to get a plant that will be able to size to meet their operations. Then individuals
is that a practical possibility though for some of our huge commercial outfits? I'm talking of, you know, major entities, maybe even the likes of Tor. Is that the thinking that maybe we should be approaching for some of them? Would it make sense?
It doesn't make economic sense. It's possible, but it doesn't make economic sense, because that will mean that you have to build a whole power plant. You have to have engineers that will have to run it. You have to have people who manage it. So that is why you see the economic of scale. The more people on it, the less the cost. So that is why it is very important for us to keep the grid running very effectively. All of us realized before the last tariff we did what was happening within the Kumasi enclave. The whole Ghana were having difficulty because the transmission network was weak. And since we did the tariff, you can see that they have done a lot in terms of investment into the infrastructure. And there's a smooth transmission of power to various. The distribution, I'm not saying that we have a very perfect system, but I can tell you in terms of reliability, we are doing above 80% in terms of reliability. People who live in the areas can attest to the fact. It is very difficult for people now to say that I don't have power for a whole day or two continuously. It is impossible from the data that we always see. Once in a while, we might have disturbances that happen as a result of some transformer having a problem or some feeder having a problem. And these are things that are quickly fixed by the utility. So let's try to maintain the network. And as a regulator, we have to keep the balancing. And if we don't do it, then we have failed as regulators, and we'll be failing the state and failing the nation as a whole.
Hold for me, Alhaj. Let me bring in Alexis Derry, who now joins us via the phone lines. Mr. Derry, you were making a point. Unfortunately, the connection did not allow us to grasp the thrust of it. If you could just go back and reiterate what you were saying.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, my point was that I am not too sure to what extent the vulnerable, and when I say the vulnerable, I'm talking about people who have already been registered, have been identified and classified under the Ghana National Household Registry. So it is like we already have a very, very, very effective and vibrant database in place. So I'm more just curious to find out whether their concerns, their livelihood opportunities, and their reliable source of income have always been taken into consideration in this tariff adjustment. And of course, I take it for granted that Mr. Ismail, who has a fantastic CSO representation, will always be making use of this resource. Because one of the challenges we have as a country is that we always have the resource created at the expense of you and I, with support from the development partners. But institutions, ministry, department, and agencies, they don't talk to each other. They don't make use of this data that has been put in place. And that, for me, has always been a source of worry. But I think that the increase, as we are all being told now, and from the data that your in-house person analyzed, we know that, yes, it's very inevitable. It's something that we can't avoid because the system will crack or crash if we don't have it. My concern is to what extent is government also putting in place measures to make sure that the sources of livelihood, and I'm more interested in the LEAP because for now that is our flagship program. The Minister of Finance made a very fantastic presentation in the 2023 budget. He said they were increasing the household, they were increasing the amount by about a very fantastic rate. But then the difficulty we always had as a country is that nobody tracks these fine promises in the budget statement because there's a difference between budget, approval, and releases. Let me give you a classical example. In the 2022 budget, an amount of 23,100 and something was allocated to all the Department of Social Welfare regional offices across the country. That is 23,000. That was their budget allocation throughout the 16 regions. One will want to find out, and if you want, you can double check to find out to what extent or how much of this 23,000, which was their budget allocation, how much of that was actually released, and when was it released? So it's something that we all need to track as concerned people and people who are advocating for the voiceless and the marginalized. Another challenge with some of these things also is the fact that, for example, if the Minister of Finance even release the money, sometimes when you get to controller and accountant general, they also delay. So you can imagine if your source of livelihood, you and I are on monthly allowance or monthly salary, and your salary delay for 2 months. You know the implications. So these are some of the things that we need to keep an eye on while taking into, in good faith, the increases and see what about the vulnerable, those who are on leave, those who are not even captured as part of the leave program. So I think these are the issues that we need to re-echo and hope the Commission in subsequent adjustments and all that will always take this into consideration.
And it's interesting you make that point, because when you look at the lifeline consumers, the exclusive ones, if you look at the kilowatt hour and the Ghana Peswa payment or expectations when it comes to the tariff, you would see that for those who in September 2022 would be paying just about 42 pesos per kilowatt hour or 0 to 30 kilowatt hours, they would now be paying some 54.46 pesos for sale. So that would also put a strain. I'm not talking about the residential. I'm not talking about non-residential. I'm talking about the lifeline ones who are practically face the brunt of any radical changes in the prices. But I'd like to find out from you. The ECG and the Ghana Water Company Limited, even as these increments apply from February the 1st, people talk about service delivery. They are saying, yes, you're going to charge us more, but how better is our service going to be from your end? I would say this recently, I didn't really know. Since the ECG app crashed, so to speak, I've not been able to use it, but I was somewhere in East Legon and the lights went off. And a call was placed to the ECG call center about the situation. I was pleasantly surprised because I am told they are very efficient, and the person on the line addressed the problem, knew exactly where the problem was. Surrounding areas, there was some work going on, and that though regularly they would be able to tell you that within 2 hours or 3 hours, they'd be able to turn the light back on. This one, they were unsure. I mean, very detailed information, and I was impressed. But beyond that, in terms of service, are we getting what we deserve based on what we are paying for these services? Mr. Derry, that is to you. And that again is something that we as consumers will need to take seriously. Of course, now there have been some improvements in terms of some of the service, and a classical example is what you have cited. But we also have instances where you call and nobody pick the call, or when they pick the call, they will tell you that okay, we are working on it, and for sometimes for days, for let's start from hours, for days, and even for weeks. So I think they must actually take a second look at their customer care, and then the communication between them and then the service user, because they are not doing us a favor. We are doing them a favor, even though to some extent the substitutes for electricity and water are very rare. But I mean, that is why we employ them. So I think that in terms of service delivery, effectiveness and efficiency are very, very, very key. It is not enough to say we are working on it. But if I'm sitting down waiting for the light to come for me to continue producing or to continue rendering other services because of the how interconnected we all are, it means that someone is going to suffer. And I think that is something that we must track. That is something we must actually be on the lookout and call those service providers and those individuals in the institution. We should call them out when and where they under-deliver or underperform. I think it's very important. For you, Mr. Alhaj Abukari, so if you look at some of what comments people have been passing, and shortly we'll be hitting the streets as well to find out what the sentiments of people on the back of these latest tariff increments. But this morning I was reading from the Daily Graphic, specifically page 13. Here are some reflections on this development. A beautician, Kwesi Mensah, says these will impact, of course, there's been that general increment in goods and services, depreciation of the cedi against the dollar, the domestic debt exchange, and all of that Ghanaians have to deal with. And he says, things are tough and we're struggling to barely survive. This new tariff will increase the economic burden. This will be unbearable. We also hear from a trader in the Circle area, Auntie Jemima, who says, the cost of everything has gone up, and it seems government wants to just add to our misery. Already VAT is up, prices of food remain high, and now power and water too. If they increase the electricity bill, I will use Bobo, and we all know Bobo, basically the wick lamp, to cater for my daily needs. Those who need the light should go and pay for it. So quite some sentiments that are shared here. Very interesting reactions. What is you mentioned that you engaged stakeholders, the AGI, the TUC, and all of that. Were they in agreement to this increment, this level of increment? And generally, how do you feel this is going to impact the ordinary Ghanaian?
Thank you very much. I think some of these concerns are very legitimate because, like I have said, it's not easy for every Ghanaian. I can't pretend as if everything is okay and people will be pleasant paying any increase. But I'm happy that my co-panelists have been able to see that the increments is inevitable. If we want to have the electricity on, then clearly we have to at least do a bit of sacrifice and pay a bit more. Individuals, I think the vulnerable group he indicated, every organization in a way has its mandate. But as a PURC, I think we'll be welcoming any suggestions or engagement from any group of individuals or stakeholders who have some sort of legitimate concerns, can bring it up, and we can look at it. And maybe if it's even beyond our mandate, we can also refer it to the appropriate quarters to look at how best they can effectively address some of these concerns. But as PURC, the vulnerable group are treated within the lifeline category. But anything above that, then obviously it will be the mandate of maybe the social welfare or the ministry in charge of social welfare and the vulnerable, which if the group even have to engage with us as a commission, we normally will just have the discussions, and we can also advise appropriately what can be done to address it so that it will reduce the burden on the vulnerable as indicated by my colleague there. So for us, what I will entreat is that sometimes we pay for a lot of waste as individuals, apart from the industries that largely may not be able to find a way. They have their machinery and their systems in place that they reduce their waste because they pay huge. But a lot of domestic users, sometimes we might not. I'm in the bedroom and I allow my sitting room fan on. Sometimes you might think that just 1 hour is okay, but it might be.
We've lost the connection there to Alhaj Abukari, but I think it was an important point he was making at the end there, that if you, let's say, leave the fan in your hall on for an hour, even for 15, half of the month, that would come with a cost. And so we also ought to watch it when it comes to some of those dynamics. Let me take some more messages. I'll run this by Alhaj Bukari when he comes through. And these are comments that people shared with the Daily Graphic. I just want us to digest all of them because some of them could reflect your situation. Consider, for example, so someone who says, from Kuforidia, some residents also called on the PURC to shelve the proposed increment to help prevent people from living on the very edge. That is what they say. They say, shelve it all together. We can't do this. Not at this time. But there are two more interesting ones. Ashale Ashite, a coal store operator at Temamanghian, said the increment in electricity tariffs would affect the price of frozen meat products. So he is into the meat products industry. But this one, I really want us to reflect on. A nurse, Patricia Anafo, said, it is very surprising that the government increased the salaries of public sector workers a week ago, and soon after, utility tariffs are also being increased. It seems the leaders do not want the ordinary Ghanaian to enjoy any relief at all. Do we have Alhaj Bukhari back? All right. If we don't have him back, is your thinking same? It appears Kola came and then all of a sudden, utility tariff increments also came. Mr. Derry.
I think that's a very interesting observation. Yes, Kola came and then utility tariffs also just dropped. It's quite intriguing. But of course, I mean, it's a very difficult situation. But I think sincerely, as Ghanaians, we don't want to get back to that situation where you will even want the light and you will not have it. It's a little bit difficult, but sacrifice is also very important sometimes. Of course, all of us are feeling it. None of us, including your very self and myself, we haven't received any subsidy, and we've not been hired to defend the PURC and the utility provider. But for me, I will again make a very direct appeal to the Minister of Finance that this time around, there is a vast difference between budget, approved, and releases. They should make sure that they double the speed at which the releases for the social protection in particular. That's the only source of livelihood that these people have. And when the monies are released and you go to controller should also expedite action. It is just like me who is on a monthly allowance or monthly salary, my salary delay for 2 months. You can just imagine any time at all those who are very active, very productive, our salary delay even for 1 month. Look at how we always shout at the top of the roof. But these people, most of them are very, very weak. They are not in any productive capacity again. They cannot march to the Minister of Finance. They cannot march to the Controller and Accountant General. And again, I also think that government, and it's not just about this government, successive government have paid lip service to social welfare services. How can you allocate a budget allocation of 23 Ghana cedis, 23,000 Ghana cedis for the department across the region, and you expect them to produce effective and efficient service? And for me, that is something that we should start tracking. It's not about this government. Successive government have paid lip service when it comes to social welfare services. And anytime we see the street children in the street, we see a mother is standing here, then we are calling on social welfare. We are calling on the Minister of Gender, Children and Social Protection. Let's do proper tracking of the ministry's budget and see how can let's put our money and resources where our interests. These vulnerable people are equally Ghanaians. They are my brothers, they are my sisters, they are our relations, and they also need to survive. So maybe Joy FM, Joy Multimedia may want to take it as an assignment. Just do a casual budget tracking of the Department of Social Welfare. If you don't have the resource, you can narrow it down. We are currently doing that kind of tracking of the Minister of Gender in all over the last 10 years, and to see the differences and to see how can we make advocacy real. Because these days, people think that you are just making noise, but when they get to know, for you, for example, you might not even be aware that 23,000 Ghana cedis was allocated to all the regions of social welfare. And that is what they were expected to work with. And the document is there. Just Google the 2022 budget, approved budget, and the ministry, department, and agencies, particularly social welfare in all the 60 regions. And you'll be amazed by how much of that was even released.
That is a staggering figure that you put out, and you're right. Some of us were not aware, but it's very heart-wrenching to hear some 23,000 Ghana cedis allocated to That is the entirety of your outfit across the country.
Yeah, I mean, each region was given 23,000.
Each region was given 23,000. Right. So that would be, if you do the math, at least for 10 regions, you would get about 230,000.
And even with that, how much was released? And when was it released? Maybe it might be the third quarter or the fourth quarter. And so what were they supposed to be producing magic? So we sometimes make a lot of noise for agencies like that to deliver on the unfunded mandate. They have the mandate, but the mandate is not funded. How do they deliver? Staffing is a key challenge. We are training social workers from the university, and we are employing gardeners and then landscape people to go to the district to work as social workers, delivering on statutory services that has been captured by law and say that a social, for example, you are not supposed, you or the police cannot interview a juvenile in the absence of a social worker. How many social workers are deployed to do that?
So those are some genuine concerns. We'll take your final comments. I would have loved to hear from Alhaj Abukari, but we do not. Okay, so Alhaj Abukari, if you can hear me, thank you so much for reconnecting with us. So we've had quite a conversation. I just wanted to find out from you, though, is it mere coincidence that we get a 30% increment in Kola, and all of a sudden there's a 29.96% increment in electricity and over 8% in water? Is it sheer coincidence?
Related at all. They are not related at all. These are two independent processes that has gone on, and yes, there could be some mere coincidence of that, but I don't think it is something that is is related. Electricity is completely different from the wage negotiations, and just as I've indicated, like my brother Derek, there is also social welfare issues that are completely different from the electricity. You see, the fact is that because for now, government is the shareholder for electricity companies and water companies, people don't see them to be limited liability companies. These are also just companies like a private man having his company. The independent power producers, because they are largely, over 60% of that one is largely owned by private individuals. But because the regulator do not interface much with them, or the public do not interface much with them, they don't know how the private participation is deeply rooted within the value chain of electricity supply. ECG do not produce electricity. They buy it from VRA and other private people to come and sell. So they can buy 1,000 cedis and come and sell it at 500. And that is the work of the regulator. The generation cost per the revenue requirement is a pass-through cost. There's nothing the regulator can do about it. The only time the regulator can do something about it is at the time of the bilateral contract, where they are signing the power purchase agreement. That is where maybe you can advise or otherwise. But once it's signed, that they are going to be delivering it to you at 500 Ghana cedis, that is something the regulator will always have to pass through and cannot vary until the two parties meet to vary it. But you, the regulator, have no power to vary that. So it's a pass-through cost. And if ECG go and buy, let's say, 1,000 cedis, they can come and sell it to 500. If they are selling to you at 500, then that means that the 500 has to be paid by somebody. And who is that person? The shareholder, the company owner.
We've gone past the days of major subsidies, right? And that was a problem. So we can't go back there.
That is it. You can't go back. And that is why we have this on the bills, people now paying other levies and all those things. And these are things that we have to look at. So as a regulator, we don't want to continuously be hurting to continuously delay. Like one of the comments said, we should just delay it. We should shelve it for now. Every day we don't implement, there is an under recovery, and that under recovery ought to be recovered because they will need that money to pay the private person who has sold the power to them. So that is just what we have to do. So the two they are independent processes that arrive at almost the same value, but not related. Thank you very much.
Alhaji Abukari, I'll give you 30 seconds for your summary comments, just to wrap up, and same for Mr. Derry, and it's a wrap. I'll start with you, Alhaji.
Yes, I'm very happy for at least for this platform, and Mr. Derry have made it very insightful in terms of the discussion. I think your in-house research person, maybe we will have to hire him as a consultant, a media consultant, because
we'll have something to say about that.
He has so much, yes, he has so much in-depth knowledge as looking at our processes and taking our own data. And I think what he did in terms of the indicators, the factors, what influences the decisions, the trend analysis are perfect. And like I said, it made my work very easy. I didn't need to go back to that because that would have amounted to repetition, because he has picked the data, he has done the analysis, and I think he has so much knowledge in terms of the regulatory processes. And such people should always try to help the economy, help regulators, and help organizations to be able to achieve the mandate. And at the end of the day, it will inure to the benefit of the entire economy, but not for us to make analysis that are not based on facts and figures. And I'm very, very impressed about. So my regards and kudos to Joy team and your in-house research team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alhaji Abukari, Alhaji Jabbar Abukari. He is with the PURC. I'll give his proper designation shortly. But of course, kudos to our in-house statistician, if you like, our in-house research man, Kofi J. Kudos to you. It is good that other entities are seeing what we're doing and lauding it. But let's take the final comments of Alexis Derry as well. Mr. Derry?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. For me, it was another opportunity for me to learn. It made it possible for me to go to the PURC website. And now that particularly I'm aware that there's a CSO person who actually have the interest of the vulnerable at heart, we will just get in touch with him to see how we can engage him the more and help him so that it will enhance the impact of some of these regularly announced increases on the vulnerable. And I think that Joy FM, your platform is unique. What you are doing is what we need to together do to advance the cause of the vulnerable and our social development agenda. I'm very grateful for the opportunity anytime I get the opportunity to make an input into it. So kudos to Joy, kudos to your in-house person, and kudos to my brother Alhaji. We will take advantage and we will engage them to see to what extent they are making use of some of these very important data that is available from the Ghana National Household Registry and then the LIP. And also finally to still make a passionate appeal to the controller and then the Minister of Finance. Please, any delay, anytime there is a delay in the payment of the LIP, you are not only impacting the individual, but you are impacting the household, and you are also impacting their dignity. Some of them, because of the regular assurance or the fact that they know that after bi-monthly they will get something, they are also able to actually use that to do some bargaining for some services. And when the money is not forthcoming, it brings their dignity into this and their credibility into disrepute. And I think that is something that we must all take very seriously. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mr. Derry, for joining the conversation. So we've had Alhaji Jabbar Abukari, Director of Regional Operations with the PURC. You just heard from Alexis Derry, Executive Member, Center for Development Initiatives. And we had our superhero for today, the man Kofi Ajay, our in-house statistical analyst and research man.